Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We will be having our conversation today on the MenEngage Accountability Framework. And specifically, we'll be looking at the evolution of the accountability framework within MenEngage Alliance, where it came from, where we currently stand, how it has developed over time. And we'll be having a workshop where we really seek your inputs into collectively shaping the framework for going forward. Because the work has evolved over time, our contexts have evolved, have changed over time. And so we are at the moment updating the accountability framework for MenEngage Alliance and looking forward to getting your inputs and shaping that. And we cornered the phrase here, accountability as a practice for liberation, and as kind of a different way to look at strengthening accountable practices. So for those of you who are on social media, we invite you to share your thoughts and reflections, anything that comes to mind, quotes, any of your own thoughts via the hashtags Ubuntu Symposium and Symposio Ubuntu. And you can also find kind of the chat happening on Twitter and social media throughout the Ubuntu Symposium, not only today, but in previous sessions as well and going forward. And next slide, please. Right, so once again, welcome. My name is Joni van der Sant. I am one of the co-directors of MenEngage Global Alliance. And I will be kind of walking us through the first part of the session. And next slide, please. And we thought this was a really, really beautiful quote from Maya Mingus, who is a queer disabilities activist. She writes a beautiful blog. Let me just here. There we go. We remove something here. The chat box keeps popping up, which is great. Everybody's sharing where you're from. Wonderful to see. Hi, everyone. So she wrote this beautiful post, Dreaming Accountability, about 2 years ago on the blog Living Evidence, wordpress.com. What if our accountability wasn't something we ran from, but something that we ran towards and desired and appreciated and held as sacred? What if we cherished opportunities to take accountability as precious opportunities to practice liberation, to practice love, to practice the kinds of people, elders to be, and souls that we want to be? And we thought that that's a really, in a way, an eye-opening way of looking at accountability. Not something that is about taking punitive measures, but something that is a liberation to ourselves and to the people we care about, and something that we ran towards, as she said, that we welcome, that we seek. So why are we doing the session today? I think, those of you who are very familiar with MenEngage Alliance's work, and I assume that's most people that are here today, know that we have really centered strengthening accountable practices as one of the core principles of MenEngage Alliance's work, and one of the core areas of work that we organize activities around. And that came from the recognition that in the work on engaging men and boys towards gender justice and women's rights, and the work on transforming patriarchal masculinities, in that we realized that strengthening accountable practices was absolutely a necessity, and concerns were being raised and continue to be raised by women's rights activists, by feminist activists, by many people and many organizations that we engage with, that if we do not center accountable practices, the work can go astray and can actually even be harmful to the ultimate objective that we have, which is women's rights, gender justice, and broadening human rights and social justice. And so it's been really an important area of work for MenEngage Alliance, and we also acknowledge that what we do in practice is ultimately what counts. And the principles and the standards on accountability that we have developed and launched in 2014 have been really important. But a lot of work has been done and needs to continue to be done to really strengthen practice and to implement those standards. And so one of the things that we really are also looking forward to do today and more broadly, and Oswaldo and Lakshman will be sharing more about that, but is that by updating the standards on accountability, as well as our code of conduct and our overall principles, and is really by collectively with the MenEngage membership, with partners, taking that process of updating them, of updating the articulation as an opportunity to strengthen ownership and collectivity. And so that's why today it's going to be so important to hear your contributions to what you think the standards should look like. I also wanted to highlight that I think throughout the Ubuntu Symposium, one of the key takeaways is becoming the connection between allyship and accountability. And if we, as MenEngage Alliance, in the work that we do, we strive to be allies and to act in solidarity with women and girls, with LGBTQI folks, with Black people, with people of color, with young people, with people with disabilities, then strengthening accountable practice and being accountable has to be interconnected always in those processes. And it's a precondition in order for us to be allies and to act in solidarity. I will be taking us through our session objectives, our definition of accountability. We'll hear from a couple of MenEngage members on accountability and what it means to them, and also the links with strengthening intersectionality in our work. And then we'll look at the agenda for this session. So in terms of the session objectives, and I shared this already a little bit, but we are here together to share about MenEngage Alliance's journey when we strive and aim to become an accountable feminist social change network. We are here to provide an update on the current consultation process for the new accountability standards. We're here to gather new feedback that informs the revision of the new set of accountability standards, and we're here to promote collective ownership. So this is how we have defined accountability for MenEngage in the accountability standards that I mentioned were launched in 2014. So accountability to us is about building gender equality in all that we do, and to ensure always that our work contributes to gender justice, women's rights, and anti-oppression work. There's also the individual perspective on this and dimension on this. It's about being aware of one's own power and privilege and being open to criticism and feedback. And it's about taking action to address personal and institutional practices that go against our principles and acknowledging when harm is done and making amends. It's about respecting and promoting women's leadership. It's around creating structures and for consultation and partnerships, and to work in partnership, and to have commitment to listen, to consult, and to partner. So these are the accountability standards, like I mentioned, from 2014, and we are now revisiting those and re-articulating those. We wanted to show a video which is from a meeting that we had in Chile with MenEngage regional network representatives and MenEngage global leadership. And this was, from 2018. And because it's a snapshot from a longer video that you can see online. I just wanted to share briefly who you are seeing in the video, because you may not see all of their titles and names in the part that we're showing. So we have Bilkis Tahira, Tonya Lovelace, who's also joining us today in the session, Preston Mitchum, and Jan Reinders. And I think actually we changed the recording a little bit, so there may be a couple of other people there, I now realize. But let's have a look at the video.
Cambio.
Accountability to me is really responsibility. It is to take responsibility for the work that we do, and that we do it in a way that it actually contributes to the work that others have done before us and still continue to do in order to achieve gender justice.
The women's movement has been in this work for a lot of time, and we need to come and be able to work with the women, and we need to be held accountable for the work that we do.
So it's important that as organizations and as men working this field, that we consult with, we involve, we partner with, we stand in solidarity, and we are that we do this work in allyship with women's organizations. We need to do that in meaningful ways right from the get-go.
El poder asegurar que en todas nuestras iniciativas estar claros de que lo que hacemos va a contribuir al movimiento mayor por la justicia y por la equidad de género.
Accountability to me would mean a feminist approach, a feminist analysis of the issues and the way you work. We should not occupy the space that women need for themselves. We should make our own spaces more feminist.
I think what we need to do is expand the dialogue now, much more.
To not approach this from a single issue approach, to really look at the layers of and the intersections of identity. Because when we really are looking at single issue approaches, we're not seeing how layered identities are impacting individuals. And what we are then missing out on are those individuals who really are at whose experiences are at multiple intersections.
And that means women of color, women of trans experience, people of trans experience, gender nonconforming people. But we can't just silo out the communities and the groups by saying that we have to be accountable only to women's groups.
It's class, caste, ethnicity, your age. It's all the differences that actually make up what power position or lack of power position you have.
How we can make this whole dialogue and the implementation, also at project program planning level, more transparent, more accountable.
Dentro de la Alianza MenEngage hemos venido creando conciencia acerca de la necesidad de que todo nuestro trabajo tiene que estar siendo como un principio la rendición de cuentas. Hemos creado muchos espacios de discusión, de reflexión, que nos ha llevado a tener 2 estándares de rendición de cuentas, que los hemos puesto como una referencia para incorporarlos de una manera transversal en el trabajo que hacemos. Y también hemos creado como un manual de capacitación con el cual nuestros miembros pueden adaptarlo para llevar estas discusiones, llevar esta reflexión a lo interno de las redes y las organizaciones.
Sorry, something happened with the video, but we can invite people to check it later.
Great. So I think a lot of food for thought and direction that several MenEngage members shared there. So what we will be doing for the rest of the session, we will be hearing on the history of MenEngage with accountability from Lakshman. And then Oswaldo will be presenting around the current and the new draft of the MenEngage Accountability Standards and the consultation process also that we've had so far. We will be hearing comments and feedback on the new draft from Catherine Nyambura, Tonya Lovelace, and Sue Franklin. Thank you to the 3 of you for being here with us today. And you have provided feedback in writing a little while back on what's been developed so far, and those were incredibly helpful. And we wanted to bring you into the conversation today as well to share your thoughts and to stimulate those who are on the call to have our own thinking and reflections based on what you shared. So Thank you. And then we will be going into breakout groups, and we will be looking at the 6 areas of standards that are part of the new draft accountability standards that we have. And then we'll come back into the plenary, so to speak, to hear what each group has come up with and to share a little bit about the way forward. So I think that will be the next. Yes, I want to invite Lakshman in to share a bit about the history of MenEngage with accountability.
Thank you, Yoni. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. So just not to be, preventing from being too repetitive on what already have been presented. Few things that for MenEngage, what we have been highlighting and learning throughout the process that we have initiated within the MenEngage as an alliance is that, as we all know, the work on boys and men actually, we sort of are more humble towards the women's movement and feminist women's movement, who actually were the ones and pioneered to initiate this work. And hence our work with women and boys on transforming masculinities needs to be honoring on the profound work that the feminist movement have been doing and have helped us to realize on the roles and responsibility that those of us who identify as men and boys, or those of us who work with men and boys, needs to internalize in the work we do in our own organizations, or the way we organize as an alliance, as a group, or in any forms of other forms of solidarity groups at the local, at regional and international levels. But at the same time, while we were advocating since the Beijing, POA, for example, or even ICPD in 1994, for example. So with the recognition of the importance of involving and working with men and boys in advancing gender equality and feminism as a vision for justice, one thing that we realized in this process was the work with boys and men was certainly highlighted and picked up and prioritized by many actors. And what we learned in that process is also that this uptake, which we appreciate at some level, but also found, brought up a lot of concerns and concerns among the feminist groups, as well as those who are doing the work in the ground as well. And since then, what we have been structurally doing within MenEngage is to have this, as it was shown in the video, to have conversation with our own members on what accountability means in the work we do and the way we are organized as MenEngage Alliance. There are various concerns ranging from this work to be, considered as a silver bullet, if I may use that word for some, for now, to prioritizing in the donor sector or any UN and other member states at the policy level, and also identifying and putting those of us identified male to put in pedestal in terms of the space, in terms of the priority, in terms of the resources being allocated in this work. And that we have been recognizing, but it's what we also recognize at the same time is that this conversation can not only happen at the global or international level, but have to be grounded all the way up to our country membership level. And that's what we have been trying to do since 2014 with the accountability standards were put out. But also, those of us who were at the Delhi Symposium, accountability towards the feminist movement came out as a very, very strong call from the symposium itself. And since then, we have been putting quite a lot of effort on having constructive and critical dialogue among ourselves within the alliance. We have done trainings with our regional networks and country networks on this, so that we can internalize what we have, as Yoni was mentioning, the accountability framework that comprise of our principles, code of conduct, and the accountability standards that we have. And down the line, while we were having these conversations, some of the colleagues who are here with us today also we really appreciate all of your help so far that you have provided to us to sort of evolve this work within MenEngage and taken leadership role in your own respective regions to internalize and deepen this work in your own context as well. And then also, some of the speakers also helped shape what accountability means and unpacking what that means for us moving forward. And in that process, what we realized was this work has evolved so much and it has grown so much, since 2003 when MenEngage was in the process of formation. The context and understanding of accountability also has evolved, and that's why we are coming back to revisit the standards we have now that Osvaldo will be presenting, and then to sort of make it more relatable to the current political context that we stand in when it comes to looking at this work, and make our work even more political, even more intersectional, and even more work in solidarity with the broader gender and social justice movement. And when we talk about accountability, also when we have to be also mindful that this is our own internal cultural change as well and transformation as well. It's not only that we are holding others to account, but we ourselves holding each one to account as well if we are not meeting the standards that we have set for ourselves, but also in the process be there to support each other on this collective journey to unpack what accountability means. And we organized a critical dialogue, where some of the speakers today would also have contributed, and also most of you have contributed in 2016 to really unpack what is the understanding among MenEngage members, what is the aspiration that is there in the MenEngage membership. And we came out with very concrete recommendations in 2016, and that's what we have been following up since then as well. In the meantime, we have also done concrete effort to build our relationship and learn from the feminist movement based on the concerns they had, also based on the concern we ourselves have had around this work. So engaging in a very difficult but important conversation with our colleagues in the feminist movement, in the LGBTIQ movement, in the social justice and racial justice movement, in youth movements, and so on. And the learning is that this work has just begun. And with these frameworks in place, we will have to bring this work to our membership level, to our country level. And it's a collective journey that we anticipate to work with you all. And that's why this process of making sure everyone within the MenEngage and those who work with men and boys and transforming masculinities own these practices, own these standards, so that we can genuinely and meaningfully be accountable, not only talk about being accountable, but walk the talk in a way that accountability standards inform the way we develop our strategies, our organizing, develop our programs, and do any mobilization and the work. And today we are here with some updated standards, and we look forward to engaging with you more and getting your inputs and guidance on how to make this work better as we move forward. So with this, I now hand it over to Osvaldo.
Muchas gracias, Laxman, por ese recorrido histórico del trabajo de MenEngage con relación a la rendición de cuentas, y Johnny también por la magnífica introducción. Gracias a todos ustedes, todas ustedes que están presentes. Me toca a mí presentar brevemente lo que ha sido el corazón de la propuesta de rendición de cuentas que tiene MenEngage, que hemos usado desde el año 2014, como ya explicaba Laxman y Johnny, y hacer una breve y rápida comparación con la nueva propuesta, que todavía es una versión borrador, es una versión que está hay un proceso de consulta. También quiero mencionar un poquito acerca de ese proceso de consulta que estamos llevando dentro de MenEngage. Decirles que, bueno, yo trabajo también con el Secretariado Global de la Alianza MenEngage y soy originario de Nicaragua. Estoy muy contento que amigos y compañeros de esta lucha y amigas de mi país están aquí también, y de Latinoamérica, y muy contento también de ver a amigos y amigas, hermanos, hermanas de tantas partes del mundo que se nos han unido con quien hemos venido en esta jornada, en este recorrido. Así que brevemente decirles que quizás ustedes han visto la publicación formal de los estándares y lineamientos de rendición de cuentas de MenEngage. Lo compartimos, lo lanzamos al mundo durante el simposio de Delhi, el segundo simposio global en el 2014. Fue un momento muy significativo, muy emotivo. Estos 12 estándares que incluye este marco se puede resumir en, aquí lo voy a poner rápidamente como un resumen. Primero, la recomendación a todas las organizaciones miembros de MenEngage, a las redes de MenEngage, de poder conocer y difundir el código de conducta que tiene MenEngage, porque es importante tomar en cuenta que los estándares de rendición de cuentas tienen sentido también al vincularlo con nuestros principios fundamentales como Alianza MenEngage y con el código de conducta que también establecimos y acordamos en el año, también en el 2014 sacamos una nueva versión de código de conducta. Entonces, diseminarlos, compartirlos es algo muy importante. Promover capacitaciones, ya Glaxman lo decía, todos los procesos de conversación, de discusión que hemos tenido con los miembros acerca de rendición de cuentas, promover la reflexión crítica, siempre que es un elemento clave de la rendición de cuentas también, tanto a nivel individual, pero en espacios colectivos que tenemos, en reuniones, en talleres. Establecer, otro elemento de los estándares era establecer políticas para la prevención y la respuesta ante el acoso sexual y también otras políticas organizacionales que promuevan la equidad de género. Promover diálogos, esto es súper importante, promover diálogos, reuniones, conversaciones con los grupos feministas liderados por mujeres en nuestros países, en nuestras regiones y a nivel global. Y como parte de eso también aspirar a que organizaciones feministas dirigidas por mujeres sean parte de las estructuras de gobernanza de la Alianza MenEngage. Ese es otro estándar que está en los 12. También el promover el liderazgo de mujeres, también a título individual. Mujeres como líderes dentro de MenEngage. No ver MenEngage, nuestras redes, como un club de hombres nada más, sino como espacios donde hombres, mujeres y personas de otras identidades de género trabajamos juntos por la igualdad de género desde el enfoque y el abordaje de los hombres y las masculinidades. También promover que organizaciones de mujeres sean y líderes de mujeres feministas sean también asesoras en procesos de planificación, sobre todo planificación estratégica que tengamos las redes. Y también reconocer eso. Hemos hablado de la importancia de reconocer ese esfuerzo, no solo aprovecharnos de esa labor comprometida, activista de mujeres, sino compensar esas contribuciones de las líderes feministas en el trabajo con los hombres. Y abordar de manera pronta, de manera consciente y eficiente preocupaciones y acusaciones, incluso quejas que haya, ya sea contra hombres o mujeres líderes de MenEngage, como también preocupaciones contra programas, cómo nuestros programas podrían estar reforzando o creando daño, digamos, sin intención en lo que son en comunidades y en el trabajo por la igualdad de género, creando lo contrario. Entonces también los estándares abordan algunas recomendaciones para poder responder. Ahora entonces quiero presentarles la estructura global de la nueva propuesta. La nueva propuesta de estándares recoge todo lo anterior, pero lo reorganiza. Ya voy a explicar un poquito más acerca de cómo es que tenemos esta nueva propuesta. Tenemos una sección de estándares generales y de rendición de cuentas a nivel individual, porque creemos que todo esto comienza desde uno, comienza desde lo personal para poder hacer un cambio colectivo y estructural. También tenemos otra sección de rendición de cuentas a nivel de las organizaciones que son miembros de MenEngage y a nivel de las redes MenEngage, a nivel global, regional, nacional o incluso subregional dentro de algunos países que son países grandes. También está otra sección de la rendición de cuentas para responder a preocupaciones y a quejas, a señalamientos que nos hagan ya sea a título individual o a título organizacional o de red. También tenemos otra sección de rendición de cuentas en la programación, en lo que son nuestros programas ya, de nuestros proyectos y programas que tenemos a nivel comunitario, a nivel nacional. ¿Cómo podemos ahí asegurar la rendición de cuentas? Una quinta sección sobre la rendición de cuentas en el trabajo de incidencia política que hacemos, en el trabajo de abogacía que hacemos. Muy importante, esta es una sección nueva que estamos tratando de afinar y de proponer. Y finalmente, otra sección de rendición de cuentas también súper importante, muy fundamental, es cómo podemos mantener un compromiso de rendición de cuentas a la vez que generamos recursos, movilizamos recursos, incluyendo recursos financieros, para poder hacer este trabajo. ¿Y qué implica la rendición de cuentas en el ámbito de la movilización de recursos financieros, sobre todo, y de relación con todo lo que es el mundo de la cooperación? Entonces, ¿qué es lo nuevo? Seguramente ustedes dirán, pero ¿cuál es lo nuevo? Más o menos lo que había antes en la rendición en la propuesta que hay con la nueva se parecen bastante. Entonces, ¿dónde está lo nuevo? Quiero resaltar algunos de esos elementos nuevos de esta propuesta. La estructura es más simple. Una de los feedback, de las retroalimentaciones que hemos recibido es que los estándares actuales son como un poquito muy complicados. Por ejemplo, los actuales hay una subdivisión de 5 niveles, desde lo individual, lo organizacional, lo nacional, lo regional y lo global. Y luego esto se entremezcla con diferentes variables. En la nueva propuesta hablamos del nivel personal y del nivel colectivo. Y hacemos distinciones, pero no es tan complicada la estructura como en la propuesta actual. Por ejemplo, quitamos toda esa matriz que había de cuál es el estándar, cuál es el método para cumplir con el estándar, cuáles son los medios de verificación. Creemos que eso es algo que cada red regional, cada organización puede decidir cómo dar monitoreo y cómo medir hasta qué punto los estándares se están poniendo en acción. Pero no es necesario la propuesta global que tenga tanto detalle. Y también por eso ustedes van a ver que la propuesta actual, en suma, son como 5 páginas nada más. Antes la propuesta actual que tenemos, la publicada, hay como 25 o 30 páginas de información y de lineamientos. Entonces lo hace muy complicado y creemos que lo más importante va a ser, y Laxman lo mencionaba, el trabajo creativo de discusión colectiva en las redes regionales y en las redes nacionales para ver cómo a nivel más local se elaboran estos estándares y estos que se vean como una referencia, estos estándares de MenEngage Global. También en términos de contenido hay cambios en cuanto al lenguaje, al contenido. Uno más importante, y ya lo hemos mencionado, el compromiso de un feminismo interseccional. Es muy importante. Reconocemos nuestros orígenes dentro del movimiento feminista de mujeres, pero también reconocemos la importancia de rendir cuentas a otros movimientos sociales y grupos y comunidades que han sido oprimidas también por el patriarcado y por otras formas de opresión social dictaminada por el capitalismo, por el adultismo, por la homofobia y todas las otras formas de el racismo, de discriminación que hay en la sociedad. Entonces, el enfoque es más interseccional. Tenemos también en la nueva propuesta estas áreas nuevas que ya les mencionaba. Hay un área específica de programación, de otra de incidencia política, de generación de fondos y el área de la sección sobre responder a malas prácticas. Otra cosa importante de la nueva propuesta es que está basada en las lecciones que hemos aprendido, y muchas de ellas de forma dolorosa. compañeros con quienes hemos tenido que lidiar al enfrentar acusaciones de malas prácticas a nivel individual, y ha sido procesos dolorosos donde no siempre hemos tomado las mejores decisiones y lo hemos manejado bien, tanto a nivel global como a nivel regional. Eso nos está ayudando mucho. Queremos aprender de nuestros propios errores, y también esta nueva propuesta está mejor informada de la crítica feminista, la crítica que estamos escuchando de muchas compañeras y feministas también, compañeros feministas que tal vez no están en MenEngage y que han cuestionado a veces a MenEngage o a veces al sector que trabaja con hombres y masculinidades. Lo hemos escuchado, por ejemplo, el análisis que hace Coffen para nosotros ha sido muy importante, el análisis crítico de Coffen sobre el trabajo con hombres y de masculinidades. Hemos hecho también surveys de consultas sobre eso, hemos organizado diálogos, ya todo esto ya Laxman y Johnny lo han mencionado anteriormente, que es un antecedente importante para esta nueva propuesta. Finalmente, quiero decirles rápidamente que estamos en este proceso de consulta, sentimos que este evento es parte del proceso de consulta. Para eso hemos estado compartiendo esta nueva propuesta borrador con 3 grupos a nivel de MenEngage, con la junta directiva a nivel global de MenEngage, que son 21 líderes de las redes regionales de MenEngage, que suman como 50 líderes, y otros feministas, personas feministas, mujeres y hombres que no son parte de MenEngage. También les hemos enviado la propuesta. Hemos recibido y estamos recibiendo feedback de esa propuesta, y también en esta sesión vamos a recibir de ustedes. Estamos procesando esos feedback, no tenemos ahorita una devolución del feedback, estamos en ese proceso. Vamos a organizar 3 grupos de discusión, ya esto es para futuro, para agosto, 3 talleres de discusión para ir más fino en la revisión de las propuestas. Una vez que hayamos incorporado esta primera fase de revisión de propuestas, vamos a venir con una segunda versión y la vamos a llevar en estos grupos para finalmente ser adoptada a final de este año por la Junta Directiva de MenEngage. Quiero reconocer aquí el apoyo técnico y político que nos está dando Equality Institute, bajo la dirección de la compañera Emma Fulu, con quien nos ha estado apoyado bastante y sigue apoyándonos en la conceptualización de este proceso de consulta. Quiero reconocer eso y saludos a Emma, que yo sé que no puede integrarse a esta sesión debido a la hora que estamos aquí, y ella en Australia, imposible que pueda integrarse. Finalmente, recordar, ¿no? Esto ha sido informado por todos estos espacios, todas estas acciones que hemos estado haciendo de escucha y de diálogo. Ha sido parte del proceso para tener esta nueva propuesta. Y ahora vamos a poder escuchar a algunos de las personas, de los líderes dentro de MenEngage y también líderes de organizaciones como Athena Network, que es una organización feminista que también es parte de la red MenEngage. Ellos, junto con muchas otras personas, como ya mencionaba, ya han comenzado a enviar sus aportes a esta nueva propuesta. Entonces, para provocar y iniciar el proceso de discusión, invitamos a Catherine Nyambura de Kenia, directora de programas de la red Athena, de Athena Network. Invitamos a Shea Franklin de Irlanda, quien es uno de los líderes de MenEngage regional en Europa, y a Tanya Loveless de Estados Unidos, que también ha sido parte de MenEngage y Norteamérica. Les agradecemos a ellos por los aportes que ellos y sus redes, sus organizaciones nos han dado en la revisión de esta nueva propuesta, y les invitamos a que nos compartan sus ideas, sus reflexiones, sus críticas con todos para luego retomarlo en las discusiones de grupo. Así que invito a Catherine, ya que está aquí de primero en el slide, en la diapositiva, si quisiera comenzar ella. Déjeme ver si aquí puedo ver las preguntas. Estas van a ser las preguntas que estamos sugiriendo para para los grupos de discusión que vamos a tener. Y también hemos invitado a nuestros comentadores, nuestros panelistas, a que se refieran a una o dos, algunas de estas preguntas, si así lo desean, o pueden hacerlo con base al feedback que ellos nos han compartido sobre, sobre esta nueva propuesta, ¿no? Así que, Catherine, bienvenida, gracias por estar aquí y gracias por los aportes tuyos y de Athena Network en relación a mejorar nuestros estándares. Y bueno, te doy la palabra para que nos compartas tus reflexiones sobre esta nueva propuesta.
Thank you so much, Osvaldo, and thank you so much for inviting us to comment. My name is Catherine Nyambura. I'm with the Athena Network, and Osvaldo had asked us to just give a bit of background of ourselves, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Athena Network. The Athena Network is a global feminist network of individuals and organizations, and primarily works with adolescent girls and young women and young feminist networks in Eastern and Southern Africa to ensure to advance gender equitable HIV response and on SRHR. And then thank you so much for the presentation and for inviting us. I'll focus on 3 questions, and I will mix both personal reflections and some of the submissions you already made in advance. And I think one of the questions you posed to us was, should this be minimum standards for MenEngage members or aspirational towards actionable steps? And I think that question starts to me to unpack process. You know, I think a lot of the ways in which you write these documents, such as the standards and code of conduct, can be theoretical and sometimes informed by lived experiences. However, when you start to implement emerging lived experiences, real lived experiences also get contextualized. So I think for me, my answer to that would be a no. We can have them as minimum standards of operation, but we need to aspire to do better and update. So probably part of this should be a commitment from MenEngage and the network to have, you know, a systematic period of updating the accountability standards, right? So that we do not take this as rigid as they are. And I think also secondly is to take ownership of the standards, because most networks, most movements, sometimes we end up doing these things because they are donor requirements. I think a commitment to ensure we are updating timely makes it regardless of whether there's funding to do it or not, right? It makes it part of the growth of the network. And then secondly is also gives it a clear understanding of how partnerships shape and evolve, right? The dynamics of working together, the dynamics of evolving and implementing programs in a changing political context, changing political environment. And I relate this closely as an African woman, a young woman, and Black woman to the racism conversation and diversity equality discussion. It's been hard for a long time, but everybody now is paying attention to it because donors are making it a requirement, right? But it's not the first time that Black women are pointing out how hierarchical and racist the international development architecture has been. And so I think we have to shift, we have to show particularly feminist movements that this is coming from a place of genuine concern for some of the issues raised. And I also realize that when people give critique, I think one of the points that you mentioned, this is informed by feminist critique. An aspirational, actionable commitment, for me, integrates ownership of that critique. I would be great, and the Athena Network, I'm speaking of the network, would be great to see a section that takes on some of the, and it will be probably a meta-analysis of the critique, some of the predominant ones, and how those ones will be addressed in this new version of the standard. I do like the 5 layers. I do like the personal and collective, but it will be good for us to get to a much more analysis of the critique and how that critique links MenEngage and situates MenEngage in a broader ecosystem of social movement, you know, and how we are working with layered. I think one of the commenters in the video said it very well, the intersections of our identities, right? Everybody experiences, will need accountability differently. And if you, from one of our comments, for example, there was a big issue about safe spaces. And for girls and young women, you can realize that the other discussion that's currently predominant is the safeguarding one, but it ends up becoming very protectionist because we are working in a patriarchal setting that tends to be very hierarchical. So the assumption is we need to protect and the word victim as opposed to address the system. And I think that if we work towards more aspirational, actionable elements, we will also be much more. My next comment now is on the elements of context and systems and structures. So for example, I do like the principles, I do like the outline of the commitment, but it will be difficult to understand the process of getting the accountability, for example. So for our young feminist network that's not part of MenEngage, that wants to be following up with the MenEngage, how do they follow up? What's the system for that? And I think we know that mostly accountability becomes the burden of the person who is most aggrieved in many instances. So it's upon you to be the one to follow up on accountability. It's upon you to record the complaint. It's upon you to follow up. It's upon you to prove and demonstrate evidence whenever those kinds of things happen. So I think we have to unpack what that process looks like and unpack it in the principle of the accountability standards we want to be holding. I think that's important. And I also probably a bit more, I like the point, Osvaldo, you are making around the intersections of various systems of hierarchy and oppression. However, I think a bit more structural nuancing, because I imagine that MenEngage is a global network, has different iterations of those in various regions, right? In some cultures, there's much more culture. In some parts of the world, there's much more context and nuances of religion more than others, culture more than others, and so I think we have to be having a much more structural nuancing of the standards, and maybe that can be part of the feedback where maybe different chapters can adopt contextual standards that are based off of a global standard. I don't know, maybe that's something to consider. And I do think that, as I said, the pathways are critical, particularly because accountability in principle is difficult to actualize. I think as a young woman, most of us who have had to go through that process, the onus is on the person who gets overwhelmed by the system. And some of this becomes, we know that the legal system, for example, is not intended to favor survivors, for example. They have to be rehashing, they have what we call re-victimization when people are seeking justice and things like that. And what I want to see personally is, I want to see contextualized approaches. I think that has come up in my previous point. But then secondly, for me, is it would be good for us to recognize the labor of implementing and actualizing these kinds of standards. The labor, their emotional labor, the kind of labor that, I'll speak a bit more slowly from the interpreter. It would be grateful for us to recognize the ways in which labor happens, particularly even just the labor of feminist critique that probably took a long time before we go to getting the standards, right? How does the MenEngage also decompress the labor away from the feminist movements and take it on as part of the accountability? I think that's important, because by the time somebody is giving critique, they probably have had to deal with this quite severely, is what I think. So how do we curtail that process and ensure that most of the labor is done by the network as part of accountability itself? And I think unpacking the intersection of these standards with other hierarchies, I've mentioned that. And then also finally is just being a bit more intentional to I think I do like that you mentioned thinking of capitalism and neoliberal structures. And now in a funding context that's quite shifting very fast in a COVID context. One of the thorny issues that probably may have been underpinned by this accountability is the issue of funding for women's rights and women's group. So how do we not just talk about fundraising, accountability in fundraising, but also accountability in also joining women's rights group when they're calling out those kinds of structures that create those models that are unsustainable, and that keep that sustain these hierarchies of funding. So I think it's important for us to maybe as part of our broader accountability standard setting, we also think through of what the advocacy agenda for the network looks like, and that is true solidarity, I think. And even if it means it's not necessarily reorienting, because sometimes I know strategic planning could take a while, but I think true solidarity stems beyond just the standards to ensuring that we are addressing structures that shift the landscape, that shift funding, that create some of these tensions that we know are underlying and the undertones of them. So that's it. I'll come back later if you have more questions for me to clarify, but I do appreciate the chance to reflect and give my feedback. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Catherine. Impresionante. Estoy tan contento que esta sesión está siendo grabada. Vamos a tener el video y de esa, porque he estado tomando muchas notas y veo también a Johnny y a mis colegas tomando nota de lo que de tus reflexiones, porque esto es justo lo que necesitamos escuchar. Y solamente quiero resaltar algo que hiciste al inicio sobre la importancia de que esto vaya más allá de simplemente cumplir un requerimiento de un donante, de que esto tiene que ser un auténtico proceso de apropiación, de ownership, decías en inglés. Eso lo tomamos de corazón, y por eso es que queremos que este sea un proceso colectivo, comunitario, de consulta, de creación colectiva, y no simplemente aquí tenemos esta lista. No queremos un enfoque legalista con este proceso. Y también me llegó mucho cuando hablaste de la revictimización. Creo que una de las experiencias más fuertes del patriarcado es cómo se revictimiza a las personas en situaciones de opresión, y tenemos nosotros que evitar eso. Si alguien nos dice algo, si alguien cuestiona a un líder, a una organización de MenEngage, ¿cómo realmente hacemos para no caer ese peso, ese estrés en la persona que está cuestionando, que sea responsabilidad nuestra, que nosotros tomemos esa responsabilidad de buscar el feedback, de corregir muchos elementos importantísimos que nos has planteado, Catherine. Ahora quisiera darle la palabra a Tania Loveless, que ha sido bueno, ya ustedes la vieron en el video. Tania, de aquí, de esta zona de Norteamérica, ha sido una líder dentro de la red MenEngage Norteamérica. Ella se puede presentar mejor, y también agradecidos que Tania fue una de las primeras que nos compartió sus reflexiones críticas, sus sugerencias para mejorar esta nueva propuesta de estándares. Y ahora, para escucharte y que todos escuchen tu visión y tus aportes, Tania, bienvenida.
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. I have a throat thing happening, so I'm kind of got cough drops and tea happening, so please forgive me. But first of all, to follow Catherine, I mean, come on, right? Catherine gave such amazing commentary, and I can't imagine, following her. But I think what I will do is just reinforce some of the points that she's already shared, and reinforce some of the points that I made in the video. And so just to share just a little tiny bit about who I am. I'm a global intersectional consultant who trains, advises, and I coach individuals and systems to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and organizational development to achieve the transformation that they seek. And I happen to sit on the NAMEN board, and I'm grateful to be with you. Having done some work with the Global Secretariat and now with NAMEN, as well as MenEngage Europe, on intersectionality and decolonization, I was happy to provide feedback on these accountabilities, on the accountabilities proposal, because I know the hearts of Global Secretariat. I know what their intentions are and what they're hoping to achieve. And I feel like it's important for me to help to contribute to that. And just to be clear, what I mean by intersectionality is that I want to ensure that we are, first of all, centering those at the deepest of the intersections and at the deepest of the margins of identity, that we are decentering single issue approaches, meaning that we're not looking just at gender, which I think is often a pitfall of MenEngage spaces, wherever MenEngagement is occurring. And I also think it's a pitfall of feminism that often centers gender only, right? Without really looking at the various intersections. And so it means decentering single issue approaches, decentering privilege, and challenging those layers of privilege and people with those layers of privilege to become aware of this privilege and to be accountable for the privilege and to no longer uphold implicit identities. And when I say implicit identities, meaning those of us who are at the margins constantly having to identify and to be present and to share the experiences we come from, but also encouraging those who hold privilege, who hold male privilege, who hold gender privilege and and privilege in a number of different spaces in terms of race, in terms of sexuality, and being able to speak from that experience as well, and to acknowledge and to be visible about what that privilege looks like and the impacts that they also are having. And then to also set a clear priority to ending patriarchy, to ending Eurocentricity, to ending capitalism and homophobia and heterosexism and other systems of power, but to do that simultaneously and not in silos, because people don't live their lives in silos. People actually are living their lives at various different identities at all given times. And so the experience or thinking as if we would deal with one issue at a time really doesn't represent people well. And so we need to be people-centered, and in doing so, we need to be able to speak about experiences at those intersections. And what I mean by working with systems around decolonization, I'm really talking about acknowledging and addressing the fact that there are systems, and most of our systems have been created around the same values that have enabled the occupation of territories and the displacement of people of First Nations, right? And those people who are indigenous to their communities, and systems that support support the occupation and the collection and the hoarding and really often even the obliteration, right, of people's histories and of their languages and of their cultures that have been stolen and commodified and invisibilized. And it means that, so to decolonize would mean the recovery of those histories and the recovery of those languages and those cultures, and the recovery of centering those who are indigenous to communities, and then to really take our systems and really ourselves as individuals and to unravel and to pull out and to eradicate those values that center around competition, that center around rigidity and survival of the fittest, a general disregard for what's happening in other spaces and centering your own. Where we can really do is to have more collective approaches rather than segmentation, and to embrace spaciousness and to embrace cooperation and to embrace holistic living and being collective and holding global community principles and engagement together. And so, I was happy to really support this because these really represent my own personal mission around making sure that folks who are at the margins are centralized, that they are heard, that they are supported, and that they hold leadership, and that they have their own actual voice present, and that they benefit on all levels. And so it's important for me to, it was important to me to respond to the call to give recommendations. And what I am really seeking and wanting to look for is to ensure that that the standards that have come forward really represent and create and are looking to center those who are living at the deepest of intersections in the ways that Catherine spoke about, right? That we're not just seeing women as a collective only, but that we are seeing women, for example, at their various sexualities within their various classes and class experiences, those who have disabilities and those who are at different ages and different traditions and different cultures, religions, professions, those who have various access and various losses, right? And so one of the things that I encourage them to do, Global MenEngage, within the principles, within the overall proposal, is to ensure that that they are centering issues of race and racism, which I think in many spaces is one of the hardest topics to address, often gets pushed aside, and I think is the reason why we've seen a global uprising, some of that coming from the George Floyd case here in the United States, that then reverberated around the world. But that only opened up a dialogue on issues that have been there for centuries, right? And so it's really about making sure that these standards that we're setting really speak to those issues and really speak to decentering white supremacy. And also, I wanted to ensure that they are not just talking about practices and programming, but we are really looking at how individuals themselves engage at the table and how they are bringing those systems of values within their work and how they are challenging themselves on an individual basis on how they reinforce these sort of principles, and how we need to excavate and to examine how these principles are in our systems and how we really need to see, as Catherine said, how some of these things play out on a country level, how they play out on a regional level, and then as well as how they play out on a global level. You know, at the end of the day, there should not be a hierarchy, but there has been a hierarchy often that has not really looked at how anti-Blackness and how anti-Indigenous or anti-indigeneity has played into our work. And so those were the pieces that I brought to the table and that I really wanted to ensure that both what we do in practice and what we say isn't just played out in our collective spaces, but how they play out within ourselves. So thank you all so much. And that's what I wanted to share at this moment.
Muchas gracias, Tania. Es súper importante y ha sido una de las líderes dentro de MenEngage que ha tenido esa voz de análisis sobre la interseccionalidad, cómo la interseccionalidad realmente es una perspectiva que debemos integrar en todo nuestro trabajo, no ver a las mujeres así en abstracto, como nos explicas, no ver a los hombres en abstracto, porque también los hombres, al igual que las mujeres, están inmersas en estos otros sistemas de opresión, de estos sistemas de poder, como muy bien los nombras. Y excelente que puedas siempre estarnos aportando en asegurar eso, en asegurar, como decías al inicio, ¿no? Tener nuestras prioridades claras. Y aquí quiero relacionarlo con un comentario en el chat de Srilatra Bratislava, y nos alegra mucho que Srilatra está con nosotros en este webinario. Ella nos decía en el chat que quizás era importante que los estándares de rendición de cuentas sean acompañados de principios de gobernanza para la práctica de la rendición de cuentas. Y tomamos eso también claramente. Nos faltó decir, o lo dijimos muy rápido en la presentación, que los estándares están también en relación con una nueva propuesta de principios de lenguaje, de descripción de los principios centrales de MenEngage, y también una nueva propuesta de código de conducta a propósito del comportamiento individual, como nos decía Tania al final, ¿no? Que al final esto pasa y comienza y termina con nosotros a nivel como personas, como individuos. Muchas gracias, Tania. Vamos a seguir la conversación y ahora vamos a dar la oportunidad a Chef Franklin desde Irlanda, uno de nuestros líderes de MenEngage a nivel regional en la red de Europa, que también agradecemos mucho los aportes que ya nos están dando críticos en cuanto a esta nueva propuesta de de estándares de rendición de cuentas. Bien recibidos los aportes críticos y queremos que los compartas con el resto aquí, que sirvan de material, de insumo, de provocación para ir revisando esta propuesta nueva y retomar la sabiduría colectiva del colectivo que está aquí y de los que no pudieron unirse a esta sesión. Entonces, She, si primero quisieras hablar un poquito de tu persona, de tu trabajo, para que la gente entienda de dónde vienen tus aportes y los de la red MenEngage Europa, y luego si puedes compartir algunas respuestas a las preguntas que tenemos sobre los estándares. Adelante, She. Todavía estás en mute. Ahora sí.
Thank you. To say that I feel nervous is a huge understatement. So what is it like for me, an old white man, to follow in the footsteps of two wise women of color? And it's terrifying. I'm not an academic. My practice has been in working with men, working in the main for the past 10 years with old men returning from isolation. So that's my kind of day-to-day work. And that has been based on the notion of what we now call transforming masculinities, so that those men could come back to themselves. And I found a home in MenEngage that supported that work and that put it in a context that supported me to do that work. I became involved in MenEngage in 2009 and joined the steering committee in the past 5 years, and I'm now one of the co-coordinators across Europe. I have this huge memory of about 18 months ago, sitting across a room, and Tanya looking across the room at me, saying, maybe she wasn't looking at me, but I was one of the white men in the room, and she says, "I want to hear from a white man." And I've just passed my 70th birthday, and that was the first time that I actually said, I am an old white man. And I actually identified that is my identity, and with all that goes with it. There's a saying in Ireland, every day is a school day. That was a huge learning day for me. And it left a mark on me. The other thing that really struck me in regards to this was Mia Mingus's liberation phrase. It was heart-opening, and that is the only way nowadays that I can work. And it is, for me, where the practice of accountability has got to be about reflection and heart, and returning to the heart to find the time for reflection and to find the challenge that I hold myself to account. In preparation for this, I've spent some time thinking and sitting with this idea of accountability and challenge. And I have an older sister who is a radical feminist activist. And when I started in 1997, I became involved in what I describe as men's work. And she challenged me really severely in terms of how she saw it, that it might diminish or impact on her work as a feminist. And I remember thinking, but this is good work. Why are you challenging me? I remember at a meeting of an initial meeting on gender mainstreaming within the Irish Health Service, a woman sitting down beside me and saying, "This should not be about men. Gender mainstreaming should not be about men." I latterly learned she had worked within the health service for 20 years as a women's health worker, and she had only succeeded in getting this on the agenda, and there I was basically looking for a share of her work. I didn't see it that way. I had been fighting for not the same number of years and not in the same way, but I'd been fighting to get men's health on the agenda. In Delhi at the MenEngage conference, A woman was sitting beside me, older woman, wise woman, and she turned to me and said, I really have difficulty with this engaging with men. I've been a feminist for 50 years and a Marxist for longer, and I really find it difficult to include that in, because I've been working so hard in terms of making space for women, and this seems to reduce that space. My reaction all of the time was, well, I'm a good man, I'm doing good work, why are they challenging me? Reflecting now, I'd spent 30 years working at the center of power, where challenge was not something that happened. In the last 20 years, I've been working in this area where challenge comes every day, and I had to learn to shed that response to challenge. So yeah, it for me, this work is personal. It is about turning up and recognizing when I am challenged that I need to reflect, that I need to step back and hear and listen. One of my supporters, a mentor, says, see you, see them, see myself, and then see the others, so that the full context is there. That's my reflection on accountability. Sorry, a moment. In terms of looking at it within the European context, my big challenge to MenEngage is that I work with, because I work at grassroots level, with a community development approach. In other words, engage with everybody that's involved and listen. And the regret here is that we didn't have a chance to engage with we have 100 members spread across Europe. We did not have a chance to engage with them, and I would ask for that chance in the process coming through the autumn, where we actually can engage with our members on the detail of this, so we can hear from Turkey, from Ireland, from Lisbon, from wherever, from right across Southeastern Europe, so we can hear about the impact of this thinking on their day-to-day work. In the main, MenEngage members in Europe are small, underfunded, under-resourced NGOs and some individuals. So taking time out from that work to put into this, we need to give them space and time to do that, and I would really ask for that. There was we had a small working group that basically said the work with men and boys seems to have drifted, that it's not centered. For me, all of this work, to quote the context and challenges, it's a fundamental goal of dismantling patriarchal systems by working with men and boys, transforming patriarchal masculinities. So that's the core of it, and we have to work out from there, including in all of the feminism, the race, anti-racism, decolonization, in terms of how it impacts on that. So I'm looking for a conversation about how that rigid masculinity impacts and is played out in all those other areas, so that we can use them to take the masculinities down into those areas and take those areas up into transforming masculinities. I'm sorry if I'm not really being clear on this. It's a half-formed thought, and I know I sometimes don't have the language for it, but I really do think that the work that our members do is about transforming masculinities. That's where our core is, and it is about making sure that the version of masculinities that we are allowing does not become anti-feminism, that it does not become racism, that it challenges these things and brings it into people's hearts and minds. I hope that I have been clear, although I'm really not sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you have been. Claro que sí, She. Y son un modelo para muchos hombres de tener ese compromiso auténtico, sincero de corazón para este trabajo. Realmente te admiro y me recuerdas cuando nos decías al inicio, ¿no? De que decías, bueno, yo soy un buen hombre, ¿por qué estoy haciendo mi trabajo y por qué me están cuestionando? Me recuerda en Nicaragua cuando estábamos iniciando el grupo de hombres contra la violencia y estábamos reuniéndonos, hablando sobre cómo el sexismo y el machismo ha sido tan dañino para nosotros, para nuestra familia, y fuimos cuestionados por compañeras feministas y nos dijeron, pero por favor, no sigan solo entre ustedes hablando, hay muchos hombres ahí en las comunidades, en el país, que necesitan llevar estas conversaciones. Y la primera reacción fue esa, pero si somos buenos y estamos haciendo esto, y nos dimos cuenta que sí, nos dijo una compañera, salgan de la clandestinidad y dense a conocer. Fue como una primera experiencia de rendición de cuentas que yo viví. Y ahora con los años, con toda la popularidad del trabajo con los hombres y masculinidades, es ahora como el otro extremo del péndulo, donde los hombres muchas veces estamos ahí en espacios políticos y hablando y todo hacia otros. Y ahora muchas veces las compañeras nos dicen, pero por favor, véanse a sí mismos, hagan su trabajo, revísense personalmente antes de seguir hacia afuera. Es decir, necesitamos esa rendición de cuentas mutua para darnos cuenta dónde es que estamos tal vez fallando y limitándonos. Y tu reflexión y tu análisis de transformación, She, es muy importante. Quisiéramos ahora, por los próximos 25 minutos, dar una oportunidad para que discutamos más en detalle la propuesta de rendición de cuentas que tiene MenEngage con base a estas preguntas. Estas 4 preguntas, los grupos no tienen que discutir, responder a cada una de estas preguntas, pueden tomarse la libertad de enfocarse en una o si hay otros aspectos importantes para ustedes de discutir, lo pueden hacer. Lo importante sí es que cada uno decida a cuál de estos grupos de discusión quiere integrarse. Y vamos a compartir tenemos a un facilitador del Secretariado Global para cada una de estas secciones de la propuesta y cada uno va a poder tener acceso a una de esas secciones. Generalmente es una página, como yo les decía, la propuesta de rendición de cuentas, de estándares, es mucho más breve ahora, son como en total 5 páginas. Entonces, en promedio es como una página cada sección y lo que queremos pedirles es que el facilitador, la facilitadora de su grupo pueda dar un tiempo para que revisen, lean brevemente, rápidamente esa sección y puedan comentarlo. Y puedan comentarlo y quizás responder a alguna de estas preguntas que tenemos aquí. Esa es la propuesta metodológica que tenemos para este momento. Y no sé si está por ahí Bianca para que nos ayude a ver cómo va a ser la mecánica de que las personas puedan integrarse a uno de estos grupos de discusión. Otra cosa importante, para el grupo 1, el de los estándares generales y la rendición de cuentas a nivel personal, vamos a tener ese grupo 1 no en un breakout room, sino en la sala grande, porque ahí vamos a tener a las intérpretes, traductoras. Entonces, para quienes necesitan interpretación al español o al francés, deben quedarse en el grupo 1. No van a tener la opción de ir a los otros grupos. O sea, van a discutir el de estándares generales y rendición de cuentas a nivel personal. El resto sí puede irse a cualquiera de las otras secciones. In the meantime, those who stay in the main room, the idea is that we can talk about the accountability at the personal level and the general accountability standards.
Hola, Osvaldo.
Hola, Douglas.
Hola, soy Douglas Mendoza de Nicaragua. Gracias por este espacio muy interesante sobre compartir las experiencias y sobre todo que desde MenEngage ha habido un espíritu y un compromiso de continuar integrando este enfoque de la rendición de cuentas. Una de mis principales retos alrededor de esto es cómo promovemos estos retos, estos estándares, esta guía de una manera mucho más coloquial para llegarle a los hombres, ¿no? Porque para nosotros que somos miembros de la ONG Colectivos, me parece que todavía están escritos de una manera que en nuestro lenguaje técnico, y una de las cosas es cómo podemos promover no traducir, sino estos estándares de una manera mucho más coloquial, cercana con los hombres de la comunidad, con los hombres rurales, indígenas, negros, afro, que se sientan más cercanos a sus realidades. Y yo he venido trabajando también en la promoción de estos estándares. Y mis preocupaciones están centradas en dos cosas. Uno es cómo integramos o buscamos un concepto más allá de la rendición de cuentas, pues porque es rendirle cuenta a otros y a otras. Y algunos hombres me dicen en los talleres proceso, yo siento que me siento, con este proceso de rendición, me siento como controlado, yo quiero entrar a un proceso de sensibilización y de cambio, pero siento que tengo que estarle rindiendo cuenta a las mujeres, a otros hombres sobre mis cambios personales y cómo podemos integrar esta rendición de cuenta como una filosofía para el trabajo con los hombres, ¿no? Que sea desde los beneficios y de las ganancias que tenemos hacia el trabajo con los hombres. Y la otra también está centrada en, que también está pasando en las regiones, muchos hombres que han sido denunciados por diversas culturas de práctica machista y que lo retiran de los grupos y estos hombres ya no van a los grupos. Entonces mi idea es cómo dentro del proceso de la rendición de cuentas también generamos mecanismos para poder acompañar a hombres que han asumido conductas y prácticas machistas que requieren trabajos personales, individuales o grupales y no solamente quedan sancionados dentro de estos espacios, porque ya sabemos que cuando son acciones que violentan los derechos de la mujer requieren un espacio legal que requiere la justicia, eso sin duda, pero también el otro que tiene que ver con conducta, comportamiento machista, cómo apoyamos la rendición de cuenta con un tipo de acompañamiento para que estos hombres se sientan que van a encaminar este proceso de cambio y no solamente de la sanción. Entonces, esa sería mi otra propuesta. Y la otra cosa también es de cara a esto, ¿no? En América Latina, todo esto de ser hombre feminista es muy complejo. No somos feministas completos, somos proactivos. Entonces, el dilema es que estamos trabajando es qué significa ser un hombre aliado de las mujeres. ¿Qué significa ser un aliado en este trabajo que hacemos desde el activismo? ¿Qué implica ser un hombre aliado? Porque también otra de las cosas es que, como todos los hombres, hemos sido socializados en el machismo y el patriarcado, aunque estemos en estos procesos por la igualdad y la equidad, hemos tenido alguna historia machista y patriarcal que de ahí siempre está marcada cualquier relación en el trabajo que se realiza. Muchas gracias.
Douglas, muchísimas gracias por este análisis crítico. Tomamos nota de cada uno de ellos. Muchas gracias, Douglas, de veras. ¿Quiénes otros quisieran compartir sus reflexiones, sus comentarios críticos, preferiblemente en relación a los estándares generales y los estándares que tienen que ver con la rendición de cuentas a nivel personal? Pero si tienen otras reflexiones también son bienvenidas, así como Douglas lo hizo. Y espero que puedan haber tenido acceso a los ocho estándares generales que están en el documento que pusimos en el link. Entonces, Nick, no sé, Nick, Catherine, siempre bienvenida, Fiston, Ana Seblo-Hosha, perdón si estoy mal pronunciando su nombre. Estoy leyendo nombres aquí que veo en Lucille, Concilie. ¿Quién quisiera? Solo enciende el micrófono y hable, así como hizo Douglas. When you feel ready, please do so. Cuando se sientan listos, háganlo. Tampoco le funciona, Nick dice el teclado. Entonces lo que voy a hacer es comentar las sugerencias que está planteando Douglas. Decirle a Douglas y al grupo, ¿verdad? Que si nos escucha, que la propuesta de que estos estándares tengan un lenguaje más amigable, más coloquial, la tomamos totalmente. Y una de las fases para llegar a una nueva versión de estándares va a ser esa fase de edición. Y nos vamos a apoyar en expertos en comunicación y expertas para buscar ese lenguaje, porque sí, yo estoy de acuerdo con vos, Douglas, de que está como muy técnico todavía. Y incluso para activistas puede ser que está muy técnico aún. Así que lo tomamos de lleno tu sugerencia. Y la reflexión que haces de que los hombres muchas veces se sienten más como regañados, como hablar de rendición de cuentas, tiene ese espíritu, a veces ese sabor negativo, acusador, ¿cierto? También queremos nosotros darle vuelta a eso. Y Johnny, de hecho, comenzaba citando a Mia Mingus, una activista queer con discapacidad, que habla sobre eso, ella precisamente. Ella dice, ¿cómo podemos hacer de la rendición de cuentas algo que buscamos, no que huimos? Una práctica que sea una práctica liberadora. Y si uno se siente controlado, uno no está siendo liberado, está siendo controlado. Y no queremos eso. ¿Sí? Pues claro, por supuesto, como vivimos en comunidad y tenemos un compromiso político, la libertad también implica rendir cuentas, pero no bajo ese espíritu acusador. Y eso lo conecto mucho con lo que decís de el último punto. ¿Qué pasa cuando un hombre que es de nuestras redes es sancionado o es retirado, separado de MenEngage? ¿Qué pasa? Simplemente nos deshacemos de él y ya, para que no nos afecte nuestra imagen, o tenemos realmente como siento que vos nos estás transmitiendo, un compromiso de apoyo a ese hombre, ¿sí? De apoyo para que haya una transformación, porque obviamente si él quiere, ¿no? Porque hay quienes están en una negación y no se les puede ayudar mucho. Totalmente de acuerdo. Yo creo que los estándares en este momento no tienen algo de eso. Y quizás puede ser algo de las cosas que a nivel regional o nacional puedan apoyarnos en cómo llegar a ese nivel de los estándares. Me parece súper bien el planteamiento que haces. ¿Hay otros que quisieran aportar a esta reflexión? Ya en un par de minutos tendríamos que regresar, o tendría que regresar el resto.
Hola, Osvaldo, buenos días.
Adelante, Jesús.
Bueno, yo quiero decir, ¿verdad? Como comentario, por ejemplo, que yo laboro para Fe y Alegría, ¿verdad? Y en el coloquio en el 2014, en el coloquio en Costa Rica, nosotros retomamos, digamos, parte de este manual de rendición de cuentas y es, digamos, algo que hemos venido poniendo en práctica. Algunos ítems. Recién vine del coloquio, lo primero que hice fue compartirlo con todos los colaboradores de la institución para hablar, digamos, sobre la importancia de la rendición de cuentas en estos temas. Y en los grupos de reflexión que hemos hecho ha sido el compromiso personal, ha sido una de las cosas que hemos estado implementando mucho con los hombres, o sea, preguntándole qué cambios personales han tenido, cómo se sienten y cómo están viviendo este proceso, porque realmente es un tema que por lo menos en nuestra institución es nuevo. Y los hombres, por ejemplo, nos hablaban, digamos, de la importancia de estar reflexionando y haciendo esto. Por ejemplo, muchos nos compartían lo que sus compañeras les decían, porque ellos decían, estamos en un proceso, mira, y estamos haciendo esto, yo quiero conversar, he cambiado. Como decía el compañero australiano, yo soy un hombre bueno, pero a la hora de conversarlo con sus esposas, tenían un montón de sugerencias de que ellos debían de cambiar, y entonces ellos lo traen a los grupos de reflexión para decir realmente estarse midiendo y estarse en lo inmediato, pues ellos con sus esposas lo practican y es algo que como no lo hemos interiorizado mucho a nivel personal, lo estamos implementando con los hombres que se meten en este proceso, porque partimos, digamos, con ellos de que tienen que, o sea, el cambio, el compromiso debe ser personal para que podamos luego ir a transmitírselo a otros hombres y a la población meta, digamos, que son niños y niñas con los cuales trabajamos. Entonces, no tengo, digamos, mayor, así pues, pero en términos de, el documento a nosotros nos ha servido mucho como una guía para ir reflexionando con los hombres y ir hablando, digamos, sobre el tema de la rendición de cuentas, y también un poco a nivel institucional lo hemos ido viendo, y siempre, digamos, tenemos las compañeras feministas ahí a la par, igual acompañándonos en todo el proceso que vamos haciendo, pues, que es un poco lo que ha venido planteando el documento, pues. Esa sería mi reflexión, mi intervención. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Jesús. Me alegra que la propuesta de rendición de cuentas esté siendo útil. Ha sido útil en tu trabajo. Esa es toda la intención realmente, que sea una herramienta que pueda adaptarse. Creo que bienvenido de regreso. Johnny, I think we agree you facilitate this part, right? I'm trying to remember the closure, the wrap up there.
Yes, that is a good point. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we had 6 groups, but I think we actually had not full participation in all groups. So I'm just going to start at one of the groups and see if there was participation there and who will facilitate. So the first one, I think, was what remained in the plenary. It's about accountability at the personal level and the general standards. And may I invite somebody from that group to share some of the outcomes of the discussion there? And let's just try to keep that to, yeah, just a couple of minutes. Did you have somebody in mind who would report back?
Yo estuve facilitando ese grupo y brevemente puedo decir que una reflexión que salió fue asegurar que los estándares tengan un lenguaje más sencillo, no técnico. Segundo, que todas las estándares de rendición de cuentas sean una invitación para crecer, para actuar mejor y que no sea opresivo, que no se sienta como una acusación, como un control. Fue otra también que se considere cómo seguir apoyando a hombres líderes que son separados de MenEngage por problemas de comportamiento. ¿Cómo seguirlos apoyando a ellos? ¿Qué se les puede ofrecer a hombres separados que incurrieron en violencia o abuso? Y el otro comentario fue que los estándares actuales se han utilizado en el trabajo educativo.
Thank you, Oswaldo. And thank you to the group and everybody who participated there. Let me see, the next group is on accountability at the organizational and network level. I do think I saw a number of people in that group. And who would like to report back from that group?
I facilitated that group, and I'm happy. I took the notes, but first let me see if nobody volunteered. So I'm going to see if anyone wants to volunteer first before I just share what was discussed. Okay, maybe not. Okay, so basically, there was a number of things. One of the questions around minimum standards, and it was felt this is not necessarily unanimous. It was just the people that did share thought that they should be the minimum standards, and that the idea should be that an organization, as they're part of the alliance, would adhere to these as the minimum standards, with the idea that the aspiration is to go beyond the minimum standards. It was also talked about how we should be looking at accountability with love. So there was a lot of sentiment about how personal this topic actually is. So although it's about rules and regulations, it's also deeply personal and deeply embedded in our behavior. So keeping love at the center, so keeping love at the center, looking at our behavior, creating cultures of accountability, and the idea that that takes time. It takes time, so we need time to really take these forward. And we need to create the space where we are free enough to hold each other to account. And so somebody was sharing a personal story of what happened in a network and how we need to start with that. It should be a practice. So then when we get to the larger issues in time, we're practiced, we're ready to address them as they need to be addressed. And this was said in the other one, but to compress them for compliance. So they should be short, precise, easy to read and easy to follow, because if they're long and complicated, it's just harder for people to actually action them and get involved. And then one gap, and I'm not sure if this is, but this was one thing that was identified, is what is the role of the stakeholders? So if we're conducting a program, what is the role of those that we are working with to hold us to account? And so where is that included and how do we do that? So that was one of the gaps that were identified. And that's, I think, everything, unless somebody would like to jump in from the group.
Well, thank you to that group. And I think also this resonated with me, what was also shared in the earlier conversation, in the plenary, so to speak, that we can have standards that are kind of fairly operational and practical, and not too technical in language. And the principles really have to kind of add depth to that and lay out what the principles are that we are coming from in our accountability standards. So how important it is that those cannot go without each other. Okay, and I'm just following here the chat box. Several participants from the group thanking Bianca for the summary. Okay, then the next group that we had is about accountability when responding to concerns and complaints. Were there participants in that group? And
we had it was Lakshman, myself, and one other participant, and I joined very late, so we didn't have much of a conversation. We were just discussing particularly the fifth item of the standards, and how it, if I remember correctly, Lakshman, you may remember, right? More like, to situate the global or the regional and some other aspects, but we didn't go much more into considering the other aspects, unless I missed Lakshman or the other. No, I'm sorry, I was not very helpful because I was not in the group for the whole time.
It was Manoj in addition to two of us. So Manoj really suggested on the fifth one to
expand a little. In other words, every one of the four are good on their own. They're concise. The fifth one might use to be have subsets expand into a sixth one. I'm not sure. But it's a little bit large in as a subject area, but it covers the subject area. But what I'm saying is that it has a couple of subsets that have to be fleshed out a little bit more.
Okay.
There's got to be there's that sort of respect you have to have for the environment that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that came up in our group as well. The importance also of further contextualizing the standards in one's own organization, in one's own MenEngage country network, at the regional level. Okay, thank you. Then we have, let me see, accountability in programming. Is there somebody to report back from that group?
Yeah, that was my group, so I can report back. We also had a relatively brief discussion because there was only 3 of us, and because the people in my group generally felt that the standards were very well articulated, that they were relevant in their regional and national contexts, and that they were quite easily accessible and straightforward, although maybe less straightforward to actually implement. And And let's see, our discussion kind of focused on the first two, which are around partnership and consultation with feminist organizations. We agreed that that was kind of a core, initial and fundamental step of accountability in programming. We spoke a little about point 3, which was about ensuring that programming is gender transformative and intersectional, and the importance of kind of working in parallel to promoting the accountability standards to really help or support our members to understand what that means in this work. And we really liked the last one, which was about articulating kind of work across different layers of the socioeconomic model, and kind of how it articulates that you don't necessarily have to focus on every single aspect, but just kind of be aware of where your work is situated in this, and be aware of and be listening and partnering with those working on other levels. So we really liked that one. I think that was it. If anyone likes to add, please jump in.
So there was a group on accountable advocacy. I'm not sure if anybody was able to join that group.
Hi, Joni. Yes, we had Ikena, Fidel, and Makul. And colleagues, I don't know if any of you would like to share. Maybe just one quick input from me, agreement on the language being simplified, and especially on the final point, it was hard to understand what we were seeking to convey, no? So just a reiteration of the need to simplify language. And then we just discussed this last point for accountable advocacy, which was challenging discourses of men as victims of patriarchy, and displacing of the centering of recognition and resources for women and girls, and just a reflection of how often that happens. That's what we landed on. But Fidel and Ikena, I think Makbul dropped off. If you have anything else to add, we didn't have much time to delve more deeply than that, no?
Okay, thank you to that group. Great, and we also know that there were global secretariat note takers in every group, so we will definitely take more broadly what was discussed forward in revisiting what has been written up so far. So the last group was about accountable fundraising, actually quite some overlaps, I think, with the advocacy conversation as well. We had Dennis, Chewy, Jan, and Hayachana in our group, and I committed to share what we discussed. So one of the things the standards say, we have to be mindful of what the impact of our fundraising is on that of the fundraising for women's rights and social justice organizations. We talked about to distinguish and problematize that in a way a bit more. There are women's rights organizations, there are gender justice organizations, the size of organizations, the age involvement in those organizations are also all relevant factors. So I think it speaks to intersectionality as well. It was discussed that there's recognition at work with men and boys is important. It is one important area of work for gender justice, and there is some right for that work or some purpose for that work to be funded. But we have to recognize that that work is done by a variety of organizations. There are many women's rights organizations doing that work too. That's actually where I think MenEngage's birth kind of came from. We also talked about that work with men and boys can never be enforced on women's rights organizations or any other organizations, and we know that some donors do that. That's very problematic, and we have to take stands against that. But we recognize that women and girls on the ground, in the field, the communities that we work with, they ask also for working to transform the men and boys that are part of their communities. So we have to distinguish between the contents of work, so work with men and boys, and who gets funded to do that. So women's rights organizations get funded to do that, or should be funded to do that. Then the gender justice organizations, engaging men and boys focused organizations. But the point that we landed on is that the partnerships are so key, and there is also, that's in the standard, it's about partnership building. It's important to prevent competition and to really have joint activities. And so for MenEngage members, MenEngage networks, it's key to really be or become part of the women's rights movement and the feminist movement in our own context, in our countries, regionally, globally, and not to have a separate field of work. So that speaks to the importance of working in partnerships. And lastly, we discuss we have to make donors more accountable to raise their awareness that they are creating and reinforcing competition and power hierarchies among those working for gender justice. So thanks everyone. Thanks so much for the conversation that we've had. I want to briefly pass it over to Oswaldo just to round off and reiterate a couple of very practical steps how we are going to take the updating the accountability standards forward.
Yes, thank you so much. One invitation is that if you want to share more thoughts about the proposed standards, please do so. You got a section of it in your group. And if you want the whole proposal, we are happy to share that with you. So reach out to us, reach out to MenEngage, to any of the GS, and we can provide that to you. Also, if you are interested in being part of the workshops in which we will discuss the new version that will come up. This is the first draft version. Please let us know also. And also through the MenEngage network, will the people get announce that probably in August, we'll do the second series of workshops. Also, I want to tell you about the hotline, anonymous hotline system that we are setting within MenEngage. That's come from the sexual harassment policy, but we want them to be used for other type of serious concerns that some people might have about us, about the leaders, about MenEngage practices, and don't feel secure, confident, safe to directly reach out to us. There will be this channel as a complementary channel for holding ourselves accountable. I would say that's another practical steps. And yes, so that will be from my end. Thank you so much. I think we should share a bit about the next activities, right, Yoni? The next.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button there. Yes, I will share a little bit about the program going forward. Also acknowledging there's a comment in the chat box if all the participants can receive the draft text that are there so far. And actually what I would suggest that we do is that we make that into a Google Doc, and we do share with everybody here, and we welcome your suggestions and track changes and comments in that document over the next period, because the whole reason why we've organized today, the whole process we are taking forward, and the whole process that has informed what we have so far is through collectivity. And so I think we can take your suggestion forward in that way, and welcome further feedback from all of you.
Yoni, I just put in the chat all the sections separated by sections. So if for those of you, I hope most of you can copy and paste all these links, and you'll have the entire new accountability proposal. And please reach out to us or send us your thoughts. You can make comments within the documents.
Great, they are open for editing. Okay, that's good. Thank you. All right, so as you know, this is a session as part of the Ubuntu Symposium, and we will have the ongoing program up to 22nd of June. And so we continue to have conversations on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So for this week, tomorrow we will have Men in the Climate Crisis workshop. Okay, and on Thursday we will have the Climate Crisis, Men and Climate Justice, and that's seminar 6. So there's a workshop on Wednesday, and there's the 6th seminar on Thursday. We have Deconstructing the Establishment of Masculinities and Intersectional Experience in Spanish. And we will have a session on From Programs to Policies, what does it take to shift the dial on gender norms and unpaid care? Next week, the Tuesday plenary will be Building and Engaging Youth Leaders, a conversation on youth leadership and the launch of a new MenEngage strategy. very exciting that we will be taking the step to launch the strategy, the youth strategy. And on Wednesday, we will be having a session on backlash, radicalization, and prevention strategies in working with young men. This will be provided in English, Spanish, and we'll have Russian interpretation as well. And then I'm not sure if this should have said Wednesday or Thursday. We have Men in the Climate Crisis Workshop with Group 2 and the Politics of Care session number 4 on men giving care. I do think that should be on Thursday.
No, there's another slide for Thursday.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thanks for that. So then on Thursday, we actually have another 5 sessions, developing a feminist framework for working with boys and men on masculinities, movement building to counter patriarchal backlash, a conversation space, the masculinist logic of protection, exposition of masculinist logic of protection, the nexus of masculinity and security in India. Then we'll have the past, present, and future of engaging men in sexual reproductive health and rights, and transforming masculinities from restorative practices, circles of peace. And so I think there's so much richness in the conversation that we're having. As said before, we continue to center strengthening accountable practices in MenEngage's work. We have to do that work collectively. And today we had some important conversations to further shape the updating of our standards, our principles, our code of conduct. And yeah, we look forward to see you tomorrow, the week after, and for the accountability workshops in specific in August, because there will be live after the Ubuntu Symposium as well. And we will be continuing to organize these spaces together. But thank you so much. For those of you who's the end of the day, enjoy your evening, sleep well. For those of you who are just starting, enjoy the day. And for everybody in the middle, I guess continue to enjoy your day as well. And see you soon. Thank you.